There is a specific type of betrayal that takes years to fully mature. It doesn't happen in a sudden flash of anger. It is cultivated in the dark, driven by jealousy and the arrogant belief that money can erase any crime. 10 years ago, before I ever put on a military uniform, I was a civilian student at the elite Southern Institute of Technology. I didn't come from money. My father was a retired soldier, and I was attending the university on a strict, merit-based academic scholarship. I spent 18 hours a day in the engineering labs, developing a revolutionary encrypted drone automation code, a software protocol that could prevent military drones from being hacked or hijacked by enemy signals. It was my masterpiece. It was my ticket to a brilliant future. My roommate and closest friend at the time was Victoria Belmont. Victoria was the daughter of a billionaire defense contractor. She had everything money could buy: designer clothes, luxury sports cars, and an endless stream of high society invitations. But she lacked one thing: talent. Pause for 5 seconds. The week before the National Defense Engineering Competition, where the winner would receive a multi-million-dollar grant and a government career, Victoria stole my research hard drive from our dorm room. She submitted my drone automation code under her own name. When I confronted her in front of the university dean, I thought the truth would save me. I was wrong. Victoria's father was the primary donor for the university's new science wing. The dean didn't even look at my evidence. Instead, Victoria and her father framed me for academic plagiarism, claiming I had stolen her work. I was stripped of my scholarship and expelled from the institute in disgrace. I remember standing on the rain-slicked steps of the campus, holding my belongings in a cardboard box. Victoria walked out of the dean's office, wearing a pristine silk dress and a mocking, triumphant smile. "Look at you, Sarah," she sneered, her voice dripping with venomous condescension. "You're just a charity case military brat. You honestly thought the board would take the word of a poor soldier's daughter over my family's billions? People like you belong in the mud, working for people like me. Go enlist in the infantry. It's the only thing you're qualified for." Pause for 6 seconds. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I looked at her glittering diamond earrings, and I made a silent vow to the universe. I walked straight to the nearest military recruitment office and enlisted as a private. Victoria thought she had stolen my future to build her empire. She didn't realize that by throwing me into the mud, she had forced me to become the very weapon that would eventually tear her empire down to the bedrock. 10 years in the military will forge a person into steel. I didn't stay in the mud. I used my engineering background to climb through the ranks of military technology procurement and logistics. I became a major, stationed at the Defense Logistics Agency, DLA, inside the Pentagon. My job was simple but absolute. I oversaw the technological compliance and hardware integrity of every combat system used by the United States Air Force. Meanwhile, Victoria Belmont's stolen career skyrocketed. She married Marcus Thorne, a ruthless Wall Street executive, and together they launched Thorne Aerospace Systems. Using the drone automation code she stole from me as their flagship product, they secured massive defense subcontracts. Victoria became a billionaire tycoon, featured on the covers of global business magazines, flaunting her luxury yachts in Miami and her mega mansions in Malibu. She believed her stolen success was permanent, but a house built on theft always leaves a paper trail. Pause for 5 seconds. The turning point happened in the spring of 2026. During a highly classified, multi-million-dollar military drone exercise over the Atlantic Ocean, 3 of our advanced tactical reconnaissance drones suddenly lost navigation control. Their systems blacked out simultaneously, and they crashed directly into the sea. Total hardware destruction. Loss of critical data. The Pentagon was furious. A catastrophic failure of that magnitude meant either foreign cyber warfare or severe hardware corruption. The Secretary of Defense ordered an immediate, no-notice forensic investigation. The investigation file landed directly on my desk. I spent 72 hours in the secure electronics lab, analyzing the recovered debris from the crashed drones. I pulled the scorched navigation microchips from the wreckage and placed them under a high-powered electron microscope. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The microchips were stamped with the official logo of Thorn Aerospace Systems, but beneath the polished exterior coating, the internal architecture was counterfeit. To maximize their profit margins on the $120 million government contract, Victoria and her husband had secretly bypassed U.S. manufacturing laws. They had purchased cheap, substandard, reverse-engineered microchips from a black market factory overseas, repackaged them in their luxury facility, and sold them to the United States military as Grade A tactical hardware. Pause for 6 seconds. They had compromised national security and endangered the lives of military personnel just to fund their lavish lifestyle. They thought the inspectors in Washington were too blind to notice the difference. They didn't know that the inspector analyzing their chips was the very person who had written the original code they were trying to run. Monday, 1300 hours. Secure Intelligence Suite 4, the Pentagon. Victoria Belmont and her husband Marcus Thorne walked into the room surrounded by a small army of 7 corporate defense lawyers. Victoria looked radiant, wearing a tailored crimson blazer, gold jewelry, and carrying an air of absolute, unbothered arrogance. Her husband Marcus was talking loudly on his phone, treating the Pentagon like his personal boardroom. "Look, let's expedite this," Marcus said, tossing his leather briefcase onto the conference table as he sat down. "Our time is extremely expensive. If the Air Force has a glitch in their drone software, our engineers can patch it next month. We have a political dinner with 3 senators tonight." I walked into the room from the shadow of the briefing screen. I wasn't carrying a laptop. I was flanked by 2 armed federal agents from the Defense Criminal Investigative Service, DCIS. I sat down at the head of the table, placing my officer's cap neatly beside me. Victoria's smile froze. Her eyes locked onto my face. The color left her skin so fast it looked as if she had seen a ghost rising from a grave. She gripped her husband's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive suit. Pause for 6 seconds. "Sarah?" Victoria gasped, her voice losing all of its high society polish, turning thin and reedy. "No. This is impossible. You're a major." "You will address me as Major Hayes, Mrs. Thorne," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a sheet of industrial glass. "And your political dinner tonight is officially canceled." Marcus Thorne frowned, slamming his hand on the table. "What is the meaning of this? Major Hayes, I don't care about whatever old schoolgirl grudge you have with my wife. Thorn Aerospace is a Tier 1 defense partner. We are protected by federal statute. You cannot speak to us this way." "Your company was a Tier 1 partner, Mr. Thorne," I said, sliding a thick, red-bordered folder across the table. Pause for 4 seconds. "Open it," I commanded. Their lead lawyer opened the file, his eyes widening as he scanned the contents. Inside were the high-resolution electron microscope photographs of the counterfeit microchips alongside the intercepted international wire transfers, proving Thorn Aerospace had paid $3 million to a black market supplier while billing the U.S. government $120 million for American-made hardware. "This is a forensic analysis of the debris from the crashed drones," I stated. My eyes locked onto Victoria's trembling form. "You used counterfeit components that could not handle the processing speed of the automation code. You committed major federal fraud, and under the National Defense Authorization Act, you have actively compromised the readiness of the United States Air Force." Victoria's husband lunged out of his chair, sweat pouring down his face, his arrogance evaporating into pure panic. "This is an administrative error. It was a subcontractor. We didn't know. We can refund the money, Major. We can wire the $120 million back to the Treasury by the end of the day. Just let us handle this quietly." "This isn't a civil dispute, Marcus," I said, leaning forward, my voice dropping to a freezing whisper that filled every corner of the room. "This is a criminal execution." I pulled out an official federal warrant signed by a United States district judge. Pause for 5 seconds. "Effective at 13:15 hours today," I announced. "The United States government has issued a total emergency asset freeze and seizure order on Thorn Aerospace Systems, all corporate holdings, and your personal bank accounts. Federal marshals are currently entering your mansions in Malibu and Miami. Your luxury yachts are being impounded by the Coast Guard." Victoria burst into hysterical tears, throwing herself across the table, her gold bracelets clattering against the glass. "Sarah, please. You can't do this to me. We were best friends. I'll give you credit for the code. I'll give you half the company. 10 years ago, I was pressured by my father. I didn't want to expel you. Please. If you freeze our assets, I lose everything. My reputation, my life. I'll go to prison." I stood up from my chair, looking down at her as she wept onto the glass table. 10 years ago, Victoria, you stood on the steps of the university and told me that I was a charity case military brat," I said, my voice steady, powerful, and absolute. "You told me that people like me belong in the mud, working for people like you. You told me to enlist because it was the only thing I was qualified for." I reached forward and picked up my tactical pen. "Well, I took your advice. I enlisted. I learned how to survive in the mud. And I learned how to hunt monsters who use the blood of soldiers to buy their diamonds." I stamped the word "seized" in thick crimson ink across their corporate profile, then handed the warrant to the DCIS agent standing behind them. "Arrest them," I ordered. The federal agent stepped forward. The sharp mechanical click of the steel handcuffs locking around Marcus and Victoria's wrists echoed through the secure suite. Victoria screamed, her expensive crimson blazer wrinkling as she was pulled from her chair, her tears smearing her designer makeup as they dragged her out of the room, her cries fading down the long, empty Pentagon corridor. The legal destruction of the Belmont and Thorn legacy was absolute. 6 months later, Victoria and her husband were convicted of major federal fraud, conspiracy against the United States, and international smuggling of counterfeit defense materials. Marcus was sentenced to 18 years in a federal penitentiary. Victoria was sentenced to 12 years, her name permanently stripped from every corporate board and academic registry in the country. Their mansions were sold at public auction to pay back the millions in restitution to the Department of Defense. Thorn Aerospace Systems was completely dissolved, its remaining legitimate assets absorbed by the government. Pause for 5 seconds. Yesterday, I flew down to the Southern Institute of Technology. I wasn't a student this time. I was invited by the new university board as the keynote speaker for the graduation ceremony of the Advanced Engineering Division. I stood at the podium in my full major's dress uniform, looking out at hundreds of young, brilliant minds. After the speech, the university dean presented me with an official, honorary doctorate in aerospace engineering, formally apologizing on behalf of the institution for the injustice committed 10 years ago. The bullies and thieves of this world think that wealth gives them permanent immunity. They think that because they can buy a signature or steal a design, they are masters of the future. They don't understand that stolen success is just a temporary loan from fate. And eventually, fate always sends an auditor. If you are listening to this, and an elite, wealthy bully has stolen your hard work, framed you for their mistakes, or looked down on you because you don't come from money, do not break. Do not let their arrogance consume your peace. Let them have their stolen yachts and their fake awards. You just focus on your genius. Build your discipline. Step onto the long path of honor. Because when the foundation of lies inevitably cracks under the pressure of the truth, their gold will turn to dust. And you will be the one standing at the head of the table, holding the pen and delivering justice in perfect, beautiful silence. I am Major Sarah Hayes, and my code is finally clean.